How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode
Back.
of the Diabetes Survival Guide Show. Today, I'm joined by an amazing individual. Her name is Averie. So, Averie is an occupational therapist who focuses on helping women during their postmenopausal phases with insulin resistance understand how they can improve their health so that they can spend more quality time with their family members and not only spending time with their loved ones, but also inspiring them that they could be a inspirational figure for their kids, for their grandkids, and letting them know that just because menopause happens to them in the future, it doesn't mean that it's a death sentence in any way, shape, or form, or preventing them in living the lives that they can have. And Averie has a personal connection with some of her family members undergoing through that process, and she decided, hey, why don't I help other people realize that suffering and being miserable and having low energy levels, being at risk for insulin resistance, high blood sugars, that doesn't have to be the case. Instead, people can live with amazing health, better blood sugars, better balance for their strength, their longevity, and interestingly enough, by doing physical activity, makes one look a lot more younger as well. Without further ado, like Averie, please share more about yourself for the stuff that I haven't covered and tell us more about what made you inspired to become an occupational therapist and even what an occupational therapist is.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you, Patrick. First of all, again, thanks for having me on this evening. It's a pleasure to connect with another like-minded individual and get the word out because this is such an important topic. This is really important stuff that more people need to know about. They need to take the time to be educated. And so, really grateful to be on here. So, thank you. Yes, my name is Averie. I have my doctorate in occupational therapy, so I'm a licensed occupational therapist. My personal journey, I've always been an active person. I feel grateful that my parents pushed me early on to be active member of the community, participate in organized sports. In college, I continued to feel drawn towards this active lifestyle. So I played club soccer and I majored in kinesiology, exercise science, and minored in psychology. I have really always been had this affinity for exercise and wanting to educate myself further, and I've always felt the benefits of exercise, which I know not everybody can relate to necessarily. So I do feel grateful that for me, mobility, movement, and exercise has been a good thing in my life. After my traditional bachelor's degree, I bopped around in various jobs. I knew I wanted to be in the medical field, but I wasn't exactly sure what because it's so vast. So I was a medical assistant, I was a scribe, I worked everywhere from the emergency room to primary care, physician offices, post surgical rehab. I was a personal trainer and managed a gym, but I craved more of that scientific and clinical knowledge. And there was always a part of me that felt like that our patients weren't always getting the answers that they needed. It just always seemed like a pill was usually the first and potentially only solution that they got. So I was searching for that career that felt like it was going to be both fulfilling for me, provide me with that deep medical education, clinical knowledge that I wanted, but also allowed me to make the most impact and spend more time with my patients. And it wasn't just going to be 5 minutes and here's a pill. So I met an occupational therapist when I was riding horses. I ride horses for a hobby, again, that active lifestyle. I was at a local horseback riding barn and I noticed that some of those people weren't necessarily riding a horse in a traditional way. It turned out they were performing occupational and or physical therapy, which right away I thought that was such a unique blend of physical rehabilitation with a mental and emotional focus outside of just being in a clinic. And one of my favorite ways to any movement or exercise or treat my patients is being outside. So it incorporated that part of things too. So I think nature is so healing. Animals can be very healing. And so it was an amazing blend of therapy. So I went on to occupational therapy school, went to Belmont in Nashville, Belmont University in Nashville, Tennessee. Now I'm a licensed occupational therapist. Occupational therapy often gets mistaken with career therapy, people trying to get you back to work. And of course, that is a small part of I love to help people if that is their goal. But occupational therapy actually originates from post World War I when soldiers were coming back from the war where weapons that had never been used or seen before were being used, and those soldiers were coming back, therefore, with injuries and both physical and emotional damage that had never been seen before. And so it was at that point that therapy, occupational therapy specifically, took a very direct role in rehabilitating these soldiers, returning them to their occupations, which wasn't necessarily their job, and continuing to allow them to have a fulfilling and quality life, often taking the form of doing activities and interacting with the world with their hands. A lot of activities involving gardening or making pottery, those sorts of things were used. So the occupational therapist is oftentimes correlated with somebody who helps people regain function of their upper extremity, their hands. Ultimately, the modern day occupational therapist, you can view us or me as a master of activity analysis. We can analyze somebody doing something, primarily mobility, movement, typically, and what it takes to complete certain tasks, whether that be stand up and get to where they need to go. Perhaps that's to the bathroom or maybe a fine motor task, things like that. We analyze that activity and we have that layer of expertise, not just how they're doing things physically, but how is their mental and emotional state. We as therapists know that nobody can do any kind of real learning if they're in a high stress state, a high anxiety state. So we're well equipped to adapt and treat both the socio-psychological part of healing as well as the physical mobility part. So yeah, that's the big deal about occupational therapists and why I felt a calling to become one.
Just the history of, oh, this came from World War One, and not so suspecting that the term would then be passed around of people thinking, oh, this is to improve my career or improve
Right.
my job, just like back
Yep.
then. But in reality, it's like, no, it could help people learn how to garden, which I'm
Yeah.
sure a good amount of people who are listening to this, especially for the women that are out there who are
Yeah.
interested in getting back into gardening and having their fine motor skills, like using the tools for pulling out the weeds or helping out with like actually putting seeds into the soil and just messing around with that. Like
Yep.
occupational therapy helps out a lot with that stuff. So,
Definitely.
yep. So, with that being said,
Yeah.
it seems like you have a lot of experience like working in the hospital, working in outpatient facilities, also working as a personal trainer.
Yeah.
So, with your vast experience being out there, what would you say has been your best success story of working with a patient or a client, and what did you learn from that experience,
Yeah.
especially in with their journey through that process?
Yeah. One of my favorite patients that comes to mind was experiencing pain, as so many of our patients. That's often the reason that they're searching for services is pain. And as we uncovered the pain, we uncovered some other things that were going on. Us therapists tend not to just treat the one aspect of the body. We start to learn more things, whether it's through casual conversation or more targeted questions that are meant to uncover certain things. Pain can be held in the body not just because of tissue damage, but there might be other reasons that there's pain in the body. And I really felt like I had met this particular patient at a point where she was experiencing hopelessness. She had been to multiple different healthcare professionals, who had tried various things. And I believe that a patient should and try multiple different therapies or interventions, whether they be from a physician or from a different area of medicine. But it just happened that the way that she described what she was experiencing to me, I was able to, I feel like, get a different picture than maybe other practitioners had in the past. And honestly, we spent a lot more time treating her lifestyle interventions in general rather than the pain itself. We spent some time talking about the socio psycho emotional component of pain, and especially once it turns into chronic pain. So we did a lot of not hands on interventions, and they turned out to be some of the most powerful ones for her. So, again, making just some lifestyle changes, educating her that cardio exercise, which is what she had prided herself on being good at all her life, and kind of avoiding weights. That was ended up being an issue for her. Ironically, even though she was having pain, it turned out that lifting weights was an important part of her recovery and balancing out her tissues. And the idea of insulin resistance did come up as well. And I encouraged her to follow up and advocate for herself. I think patients, one of my favorite things to do is to instill in patients that they are in charge of their own health journey. No one cares as much as they do about their own health. And so it's important to develop that advocacy and almost an intuitive relationship with their health, becoming more intuitive with, is this pain right or wrong? Is this feeling that I have in my body, whether that's just fatigue, this energy, is this right? And if anything in your mind or body says that it isn't right, then keep searching for the answer, because there is one out there. There is somebody who can help you and give you maybe just a simple answer. So I felt like I connected with her and gave her some simple changes that were lifelong lasting for her and really changed her outlook on life.
I'm getting chills hearing those stories. It's amazing because Avery, you did a good job of focusing on, instead of just the pain conversation and nagging that down and trying to figure out what can we do to try to solve it in this situation. And instead, it's more about let's focus on what we can control and focusing more in on what does your day look like? What activities are is one currently struggling with, and what can we do to try to make small adjustments and making a game plan with that patient that you worked with to get to the point where she was able to move a lot better, participate in her hobbies, it seems like a lot more easily, and also learning more about what is causing some of the concerns of the pain and the other issues with that. And even that in itself speaks volumes and power of just figuring out, just chatting with someone like Avery, of course, to figure out, hey, what game plans do we need to work on making those lifestyle adjustments and how can we move forward with it? So I guess with that being said, when you were working with that particular patient, like I know you said like focusing on some lifestyle changes. What are some common lifestyle changes that you would chat about with a particular client, and what would that exactly look like for someone who doesn't quite know the terms? What's lifestyle changes? I have no idea what that means, just to help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for asking, because it can be such an intimidating, especially I feel like the word holistic is such a buzzword right now, and people are like, I don't know what that means, so I'm not going to go there. For me, it's really important to find out what is the patient doing, whether they recognize it or not, repetitively all the time. And this might be a certain motion that's contributing to, we'll just say, wrist pain, for example, that they might not realize that they're doing so repetitively or chronically, that I can just help point out. Or sometimes it has to do more with something that's happening inside the mind. What are triggers for certain stressors that people have that they don't realize are triggering them quite as often as they might not understand or know how much that's affecting their health? So, as far as lifestyle interventions, one of my first questions for people always is, how are they sleeping? I think sleep is hugely underrated, not just physically. How are you sleeping? What's your position when you sleep? Because there are lots of research that supports certain positions that are optimal for health and not. But also, what are the other conditions with sleep? What's the temperature of the bedroom? What are the lights like in the bedroom? Other distractions, noises? What's their sleep hygiene routine? Things like that. So I think sleep is so important, under talked about, underrated. And so that's always a question I address with my patients, whether I'm talking about pain with them or not. So sleep, number one. I would say, how much sunlight are people getting? Now, I recognize that this varies depending on where you live and what season it is, of course. So those are the uncontrollables typically. Of course, you can choose to live where you want to some extent, but there are many factors that kind of tie you down to a certain place. So seasons and place that you live, we're going to call them uncontrollables. But there are things that we can control, things that our modern day life is not necessarily set up to support. We jump on our phones first thing every day instead of going outside and doing that first 5 minutes out in the sunlight. So addressing the time that people are spending in sunlight and in nature in general. And then lastly, always, what are people eating? Our gut is a huge factor in our health. You are what you eat plays a little bit into that old adage, does ring true for many people. And especially as we age, and we get hit with other normal processes such as menopause in women, what you eat becomes that much more important. And it's the building blocks for how you feel every day. We're basically like house plants: sunlight, sleep, and what are you putting in the body? And a lot of things can be fixed just from those simple, basic lifestyle changes.
Oh, goodness. Crazy how the simple things can be huge factors of how we are feeling. So if the sleep is great, we're feeling great. If the food is dense in the quality of nutrients, we're feeling great too. And then similar things for trying to help manage our stressors too,
Yeah.
and making sure that we know what we can do for small acts to make it improvements. So good. What are some common misconceptions that people with postmenopause, insulin resistance, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, what are some common misconceptions that you had to help debunk them in? And how would you help educate them to understand how these different factors are connected with each other?
First and foremost is that it can't be fixed because menopause happens to every woman and that it's just part of the natural process for women. While menopause is unavoidable, that doesn't mean that the symptoms and the negative health effects do have to be so degrading or take you down so significantly. There are ways to ease into that change of your life. So number one, that it just can't be fixed. It's just part of menopause. If you have somebody, a healthcare practitioner telling you that, go find somebody else because there are things that can help. So that's number one misconception. The main idea behind insulin resistance increasing for women going through menopause is that lack of estrogen. So that lack of estrogen is going to affect our bodies in so many ways, and insulin resistance is one of them. So I would say to those people, I would encourage looking at this. So the same things that I mentioned earlier about sleep and making sure their food is nutrient dense, specifically relating to protein. I think another misconception is that women think that cardio is the way to just burn the calories. They relate taking in sugar and carbs to calories, which, yes, in a basic sense, but each nutrient works very differently in the body, and that includes carbs and sugar. And so we've actually found that muscle mass is much more effective in fighting insulin resistance than cardio. I think there's a stigma sometimes on women lifting weights, not wanting to be too bulky, if you will, when the reality is that lifting weights is an essential part of fighting insulin resistance, ensuring that our muscles, because our muscles can help manage that so well. They can help manage our glucose so well. So teaching women how to move better, how to exercise better, that absolutely includes weights. I would never tell people not to move in certain ways, but oftentimes they just hit the pool, hit the aquatics classes. And while that's fantastic for cardiovascular and just moving in general and social engagement, you're not really getting the weight bearing that's required for your muscle mass and your bone density in the pool. Teaching them how to lift weights correctly and what kind of foods they should be prioritizing, what kind of nutrients they should be prioritizing, and to tell them that it can be fixed to some extent. Of course, there's nature in there, but certainly some of the interventions that we can put into play can help.
Mm. A lot of things that are out there and ways to help debunk the barriers that people think are real barriers when in reality, no, these are just imaginary barriers that was caught up through different aspects, especially with the getting bulky when lifting weights. That's a thing that I struggle when I'm working with my patients too of, oh, I'm afraid to lift this weight because I'm going to become like a really macho person. I'm like, first off, a good amount of the patients that I have, these are older adults, and a good amount of them too are like older women, and they're afraid of this conception of being this really bulky or massive person, when in reality, when you were younger, I would ask them, I would say, hey, how much did your kid weigh when you were carrying them around? How much did the dog food bags that they carried to and from inside of the house, how much did that weigh? And they're like, oh, I'm afraid to lift up this teeny weeny, like 3 pounds. And then here they are, like being a super mom back in the day of carrying like a 25-pound dog bag on one arm, carrying their like 20-pound kid on another hand, while also like carrying their purse on that same shoulder throughout that side and moving around, and they didn't end up getting bulky in their lifetime quite yet. So I'm just like, so you
But
lifted all that weight, but you didn't get bulky.
yeah,
How does that make sense?
sure. I really like that. That's a great way of relating real life to what we're trying to teach them in a clinical space.
Yeah. And majority of the time, people's idea of, oh, I want to be able to look this certain way. I'll say that look is going to weigh a lot more than one would think because having that muscle mass and more lean muscle mass, which acts like a sponge to soak up the blood sugars, which I tell a bunch of people every single time, that is actually more denser compared to fat. So if we were to take a look at, oh, what does 10 pounds of protein look like versus what does 10 pounds of fat look like, or like the muscle mass, that fat mass is going to take up a lot more space compared to that 10 pounds of muscle. So it's not really getting bulky, it's more about getting lean.
Definitely.
That's the way to go.
Think it's all about teaching people that it's not about what you're looking like on the outside. We're talking about what is happening on the inside chemically,
Mhm.
physiologically. That is so important that those muscles are doing.
Yep.
I like,
Feeling good too.
yes. And typically you start looking better as well. So it really all evens out.
So, what would you say has been the hardest lesson that you've learned when working with patients with insulin resistance going through menopause? And how did you navigate that situation? And how did it change your ability to treat other patients in the future?
So I think when you get to the full blown type 2 diabetes, which is the stage after insulin resistance begins, there's a lot of stigma involved in that diagnosis. There's a lot of shame that comes with it. Not always, which is surprising, and that's a different discussion, but not always, but oftentimes these people are dealing with some sort of overweight or obesity. That comes with a stigma as well. So the first barrier I always try to break down, and this makes it hard, and this is when you really do have to tap into the emotional piece. And it's something you have to learn as a therapist as well, because we have a stigma that we need to break down as well, just like the regular society does, but that it's not the patient's fault. Getting them to understand that it's not their fault of why they're in this situation. There's factors, tons of factors that are involved in this condition or diagnosis. Some that are they don't even know about that are working against them. It's not just calories in and calories out, no carbs, no sugar. It's a bit more complex than that. So recognizing that. And another hard part as a therapist, we are prideful people and we love to have the answers. And so I have experienced times when I have done what works for most people, and perhaps that person didn't get the results that we were hoping for. And while that can be hard and frustrating, I also find hope in it because this process is so individual. And I find that encouraging that there's more out there to learn and that it's important to take the individual into consideration and keep digging into the okay, so those typical stuff that we normally do didn't work for you. Let's keep going. Let's keep trying and changing that. For sure, breaking down the stigma and the shame that comes with insulin resistance and the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, and perhaps the body shame that they also are experiencing. And then breaking through some of the more difficult cases, the ones that maybe don't present or don't respond to your typical interventions the same way that others have. Just always learning and continuing that journey.
Mhm. The process of putting that pride in the backseat and being humble to actually listen to what's going on. Okay, maybe the go-to textbook thing isn't quite working. Then it's a matter of let's keep working through this, figuring out what will work so that eventually that result of what someone is looking for becomes a lot easier and that process gets a lot bit better. And then focusing on instead of saying, hey, sure, it's not one's fault. And instead of focusing on those troublesome, the difficult navigating like social stigmas per se, and focusing in on, okay, what can I control? So
Yes,
much more empowering compared to thinking that one doesn't have any control of their situation. So
for sure.
crazy
Yep.
times. And another thing I want to add to that as well is something that people don't quite recognize is even people who are underweight, they can actually have type 2 diabetes. I was actually working with a patient a couple weeks ago, and this particular woman, she was probably about 5'3" and weighed about like 90 pounds. Very
Wow.
skinny, like
Yeah.
skin and bones, hardly
Right.
anything on there. Blood sugars was tremendously high compared to what the average values were. And then her A1C levels was also at that point where she was in that like type 2 diabetes range, despite not fitting into the stigma of, oh, people who are overweight or who are obese, they're more likely to have type 2 diabetes, or like only people with overweightness or obesity would have type 2 diabetes. Like this person completely threw a loop for a bunch of people what they were thinking about because even the doctors were both perplexed. They're like, what do we even do to help control her blood sugars? Because giving her the weight loss medications, that's not great because she's already thin and frail, that doing any more would increase her risk of getting
Yeah.
another fracture or
Yeah.
putting her more in a calorie deficit, so eating way less food than what she was already non-existently eating,
Sure.
and moreover starving herself. So it's okay, what can we do instead? So it was focusing on, okay, dietitians, it's thinking about what lean sources of protein can we provide for her. And then
Yeah.
for the strength training component, this is very underutilized and not talked about as much. It's like muscles act like a sponge to soak up those blood sugars. So if we're able to help train them, stimulate them to become more leaner, more effective in using those blood sugars more appropriately, all of a sudden her blood values are starting to get a lot better. She's able to feel more energetic because now instead of the blood sugars just sitting and staying in the blood, now it's actually able to move effectively to the muscles, move effectively to the brain and the other parts of the organs a lot more efficiently because now those muscles is acting as like a, if I were to like give an analogy, imagine someone is driving a car and this is like a very old rinky-dinky car compared to, all right, let's give this old car a new upgrade. And that new upgrade would be like a good analogy of doing that strength training component, building that lean muscle mass, and improving one's ability to do more things actively. Like they're able to go for a lot longer places. They're more effective at utilizing the gas for that newer car and that newer model compared to the one that's a lot slower, burns up a lot more gas, but just doesn't go as far and it's more groggy and it's probably going to get broken down some other points. So,
Love these analogies. It really
yeah.
helps people put things into perspective because the body can be such a mystery for the
Mhm.
average person. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're just here on the car ride trying to see what we can do to help make things a bit more efficient and smooth. All right. So with that being said, a few more questions before we're finished up over here. So more like a surprise question. So
Okay.
what question would you ask yourself that we haven't asked before on here that you think would be beneficial for the audience members who are listening to this?
What question would I ask myself
Yep.
if I were in your shoes?
Yes. Basically, if you're in the patient's shoes, someone who's struggling with the menopause, insulin resistance, looking for that piece of advice, aside from the sleep, aside from the strength training, and aside from the protein factor, because we were talked about a lot of that, but now it's
Right.
like, what's another thing that would be simple, easy to implement, and being consistent with it will help in the long run?
I suppose the next thing that comes to mind that I would encourage my patients to do, so I don't know if this is, we'll form it into a question. We'll do the answer first and then we'll create a question from.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Social connection is being shown to improve longevity. It even will outweigh the potentially very harmful effects of carcinogens such as like smoking and drinking too much. It's why when you read about these longevity studies of these people that live in different parts of the world, like Okinawa, Japan, or Sardinia, Italy, that are in these blue zones, we are fascinated with why do they live so long and so well, so functional long into their age. And a huge component that we think is part of it is social connection. So I would share with my patients that building a network, destigmatizing perhaps some of their shame that they feel surrounding their symptoms of menopause. Perhaps their doctor did tell them that their bone density is low. And instead of holding that in and and worrying about it, sharing that with a community of trusted individuals, joining groups where women are experiencing similar issues, talking about the stigmas associated with these diagnoses, and creating that social connection with our fellow human beings that reminds us that this is how we were meant to be, was in these communities, in herds of people, and gaining knowledge and insight and just straight up empathy. The benefits of empathy are with another human being are vast. Social connection. So I don't know what question we can come up with out of that, but that's my answer.
How
That's a missing piece for people.
how does your social circle
There we go.
impact your health? Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not necessarily talking about, although social media and Facebook can be a great way to get the ball rolling, that certainly helps us be connected. It's how I met you, Patrick, via social media. So I'm not negating it. But ultimately, we need real in person human connection and even touch to relate to other folks going through similar journeys and teach the next generation that this is what health looks like. And
Mm,
it's a journey, it's up, down, and it's constantly looking for how to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. So getting our kids to see that too, how
mm.
important that is.
Being able to help build more of that fulfilling relationship, meaningful relationships that people can have more of that empathy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have bad habits, don't feel shame about them.
Hmm.
Talk about them instead. Try to make small little changes that you can, chip away at the bad habits if you can, but do them together in a community with like-minded people
Hmm.
and do them in a social way. So,
Ah, so good to hear. All right. And I know for some other folks, they're learning about this, listening to it. Maybe their social life may not be super great, maybe due to a particular condition that limits them in being inside of the house and maybe receiving care. And Avery, one thing that I haven't mentioned earlier during the intro and stuff, Avery actually has an awesome business that she started up recently, Living Revived Therapy. So she also helps out with mobile visits, if I remember correctly, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
being
that's
able
right.
to go into the person's their home or other areas and oh my gosh, how Avery described it, she does a lot better at this of what she can do, the areas that she can be at, and the creativity of being in those areas too. Avery, just take it away for that to explain of how your business kind of runs to help support people and potentially taking a step forward in building some of that social connection as they're undergoing some hardship that's preventing them from being able to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I created my business, Living Revived Therapy, because I felt like traditional healthcare models were at times failing both the patient and the healthcare practitioner. I wanted a different solution for both of us. We both deserve better. So, Living Revived Therapy is all about that, exactly that, living revived and not just surviving. So, we're going to live revived in my business. I offer mobile and concierge occupational therapy visits. My specialty is treating women experiencing menopause and the debilitating effects that can have on their life, including pain, decreased function, decreased mobility, increased fall risk, insulin resistance, decreased bone density, and a whole other horde of scary boogeymen in the closet. So I'm here to help educate, demystify, destigmatize, and do all of that, hopefully teaching my patients something, but do all of that preferably in a setting that includes some sort of nature. I'm very passionate and believe in the power of being outside in the sun if possible, experiencing the fresh air. So, re engaging with the outdoor energy for people, and also, if possible, in a social setting. In fact, I'm launching my first annual spring gardening for longevity course. It's going to be small groups, so just six of us, seven including myself, and we will be growing our own food. So we'll be learning about the amazing benefits of low impact aerobic exercise during an activity like gardening and how effective that can be. We're going to work our muscles a little bit by picking up bags of soil and digging and churning it up and things like that. We're going to do all of that while creating social connection, which is so important, as we've mentioned, with like minded individuals. So, we're going to talk about the struggles and what's going well, what's going right, hopefully on some sunny days so we can synthesize some more vitamin D. And on the last day, we'll have a guest nutritionist come in and we're going to actually cook what we've grown. We might have to supplement it a little bit from the grocery store if we are a little unsuccessful, but we'll be able to laugh through it all, which is another huge benefit for health is laughing. So yeah, so that's my business model is getting outside the clinic when and if possible and having a relationship with nature and improving our intuitive feelings about health and how to be better a little bit every day.
If I was a 82-year-old woman who is anxious about getting back into gardening because of some debilitating fall, and I was like a bit anxious about that situation, but also wanting to help improve my social circle because maybe some of my friends, they lived their life, they had a happy life, but now it they had their time. Now it's okay, I got to find some other new friends to hang out with. That sounds
Yeah.
like an amazing opportunity. Like being able to
Yeah.
learn how to help improve my mobility so that I feel more confident in keeping myself on my feet, being able to learn how to lift and carry the soil the right way, and then also being engaged of cooking and building up my experience in that. That sounds like an awesome time. And of course, being able to chat, have fun, have laughs, share jokes with the other people who are participating. That's an awesome opportunity.
It's a win-win.
Oh, yes, most definitely. Okay, speaking of which, since we were talking about food, like
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what's like your ideal full course menu?
Yeah. And this took a lot of thought for me too, because I am a foodie. I'm so grateful that like I started this whole conversation with, I'm grateful that I am an active person. It comes naturally to me. But I'm also grateful that I'm a foodie because I recognize that not everybody is. Not everybody is motivated by food and truly enjoys the art of cooking and eating and enjoying the different flavors and stuff out there. Thankfully, I'm a foodie. I love it. So here's my ideal meal. I'm a big fan of avocado. Certainly, making it into some sort of guacamole is wonderful, but I like it just sliced as well with a little bit of salt and pepper to flavor it up and dipping either sweet potato or tortilla chips into my avocado as my appetizer. So I've got a full course meal here. So that's just my appetizer
It's perfect.
to snack on while I'm cooking my meal. I'm a big fan of meat protein for me, so I'm going to choose some chicken thighs. I prefer the thigh to the breast personally. I like that little extra taste that comes with the fat on the chicken
Hmm.
thigh.
More
Um,
flavorful.
yes, more flavorful. Flavorful. I go for about a cup of steamed green beans. I am much more on the snappy side for my green beans. I keep them nice and snappy and I steam them for just a few minutes. And I love a little olive oil and dill, the seasoning dill, which I grow in my own garden. So it can't tell you how satisfying it is to just go pick my own dill and throw that on my green beans. And then typically some sort of carb, but one of my favorites is an acorn squash. I bake it in the oven and drizzle a little bit of butter, honey, and cinnamon on it. And it's
Mm.
a wonderful little addition there to my dinner. For dessert, I found this recipe last year and I've been making it ever since. They're sweet potato brownies, really simple ingredients, and they taste exactly like regular brownies. It's mashed sweet potato, honey, almond butter, and cocoa. That is it, four ingredients, and you bake them in the oven just like you would a regular brownie, and it's so good. And I'm
Mm.
gonna pair that up with a big glass of milk. So
Ah,
that's my full course meal.
that's delicious. Like a lot of it too is simple, easier to make, and if someone is really patient of being able to put that in the oven, heating it up and having a good time with that, then it's
Oh
going to be
yeah,
a great time. Delicious
yeah,
foods.
absolutely.
All right. So, other fun questions that I have.
Yeah,
Now that we had a fantastic meal, a fantastic feast with the ideal full course menu that you had, Avery, now it's all of a sudden the apocalypse happens
yeah.
and zombies are everywhere. So, what's your zombie apocalypse survival plan? How would you deal with all that stuff?
If you're not experienced with chickens, don't underestimate them. Chickens originated back in the time of dinosaurs, okay? Specifically roosters, which is
Mm.
the male of the chicken. I have chickens right now. It's something that I have enjoyed now for almost 2 years. Not only do I get the benefit of the eggs, so right now I feel really wealthy because I have fresh, pasture raised eggs every day out there. But it's also a great way for me to get some exercise and some morning sunlight, which again is super important. So I go out and feed my chickens every morning. But I tell you what, those roosters are downright scary. So I would line my property with as many roosters as I possibly could because they're going to be great guard dogs. And I would just have my own little homesteading property that I'm aiming for anyways on a remote area. I'll grow all my own food, so I'll be self-sustainable that way. I won't have to leave anywhere to get my food. It'll be all self-sustaining, and I'll have my terrifying roosters to guard my property. If you've ever been even slightly looked at the wrong way by a rooster, you'll know what I mean. I'm talking Jurassic Park, feathers around the head. Like they literally look like little velociraptors and they come at you with those claws. So I'm going to line that around. And then also donkeys are surprisingly protective. They can be a little bit nasty too, certainly if they're protecting their own land. So I'm going to, and for every rooster, I'll also have a donkey down. Every fifth rooster, I'll have a donkey around my property to help be my guardians. But yeah, it'll just be a bunch of me and just a bunch of animals and food. So hopefully I make
Good old farm full of
that's right.
animals that's able to
That's right.
protect you. And fun fact for some folks that are out there who didn't know, a lot of the dinosaurs' origins, they're
Oh,
like a specimen of avian species per se. So like the Tyrannosaurus Rex, it's like long distance cousins compared to the rooster.
no, I believe it because
Yep.
the reason I know so much about this, these, how scary they can be is we had one. We had to sadly say goodbye to him because he was becoming a problem. He was dangerous. He would attack if he felt like his hens were in jeopardy in any way. And oftentimes he misconstrued the situation.
No.
he would attack. So they are really scary.
No, goodness. Yep.
Beautiful. They're beautiful animals, but you got to have a plenty of area so that they never feel threatened.
No, yes, most definitely. Making sure that one can de-stress, be out of that fight or flight situation and be more in that relaxed state and having better controls and assessment of what's going on. A lot more safety.
That's,
All right. Avery, it has been a great time having
thank
this conversation with you. I'm sure the audience members who are listening to this, those who are watching this, those who are really feeling that message, they're like, I'm so excited to learn more about Avery's message. Like, I would love to learn more about that upcoming retreat that she has going on and learning more of what she does. How can people find you?
Yes, thank you. So, first and foremost, my website gives the best amount of information about me. You can find that at www.livingrevivedtherapy.com. So, you can read more about me, my mission, what I offer, the different services, what I specialize in, get to know me a little bit better on there. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Living Revived Therapy. Same things, hopefully easy to find. On my Instagram, I am definitely a new presence on there, but I'm working at it every day. If you're not ready to jump right into full-fledged therapy, but you still want to know little things or just get to know me more, I'm starting to do some tutorials and some home exercise programs, just really simple stuff that I apply to my own day routine that can be really helpful to just get started with. And then if you like what, then maybe you can send me a message and we can get to know each other better. Yeah. And then I can be emailed at Averie, Averie, at livingrevivedtherapy.com. There's a theme there. You find Google Living Revived Therapy and you should be able to find me. I'm,
Awesome.
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm happy to do telehealth visits if we aren't within driving distance of each other. So
All right, sounds good. Who knows? Maybe you'll have a client who wants to, hey, Avery, can we just fly you out to our area and do an awesome retreat out there? Who knows?
happy to do it. Yep. Happy to do it.
All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we shared a lot of amazing tips. So hopefully you could apply one small thing to help improve your health, improve those blood sugar controls, and start chipping away at that A1C level so that type 2 diabetes can be put into remission. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.